Hi, everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand registered not for profit educational charitable trust called Common Knowledge. And today I'm going to talk about myself and my experience with COVID and being a long haul person. It's risky for me. I didn't grow up in social media. I've been very quiet in the background for many, many years, working with our trust and the work that our trust does with the childbirth preparation, birthing better. I've just recently joined some COVID long haul groups, and I've been doing a series of playlists on our Birthing Better YouTube channel about COVID. And so I want to explain how I got to where I am and sort of what I see for the short term, medium term, and long term. It all blends together in my life. I've been the director of the trust since the 90s. I brought the concept of the trust from the United States into New Zealand because of the work that I did with hundreds of families in the early 1970s. And our trust's mission statement was that I, as an individual, our family, our friends, our villages, our societies, that we should be able to use any and all healthcare systems. There are three of them: the modern medical system, traditional healthcare, and natural health. Nothing should be against one another. We just should be able to use anything that helps us. And it's very, very it's heightened in pregnancy and childbirth, and extremely heightened with COVID because the medical profession doesn't know how to help us as long haul people. And it really has been the ambulance at the foot of the cliff with people who have severe COVID symptoms. In fact, I started to research all of this in January of 2020. Childbirth, it's 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth, and each woman is doing the activity by herself. And sadly, the trend was that women just know how to do it. Just because we're pregnant, we don't know how to birth anymore. We know how to be a good lover or to cook just because we're hungry. We need skills. So for 50 years, I and our trust has been advocating that we become skilled under the concept of every little bit helps. So this all sort of came together. The research that I was doing in New Zealand in January um, had to do with the fact that Wuhan was being shut down. It's unlike the Chinese to act so intensely. So I started to do research about the other Asian countries nearby because they were the ones that were going to be affected. So what was I learning back then? January and February. I got COVID in March. So in that 2 month period, everything got formed as to what I did once I got sick. So in January and February, Wuhan got shut down. In February, the Chinese started to build fever hospitals. They recognized very early that if a person got very, very sick with COVID and was intubated, that there was a poor prognosis. Thankfully, we even had a medical system. Without a medical system, the fatality with COVID would be much higher. They began to build the fever hospitals. Pictures of people being dragged out of their home and Western people going, that ain't going to happen to me. Why did they do that? Because they realized as they began to look at the behavior of when people got sick was that it's better to try to treat or do something very early on than to wait until people really develop this cytokine reaction, which some did and some didn't. So they built these massive fever hospitals. But that got me thinking. And it got me thinking because of the work I do with pregnancy and childbirth is skills. And it got me thinking particularly because the governments around the world, New Zealand was included, all the governments around the world, health systems, were saying the same thing. Try to not catch this. And they were coming up with a plan. The plan was it's a droplet disease. That was beginning to be known rather than just sort of aerosol. And stay away from people. Cover. Like that. Um, Mask thing was still unclear, and that didn't become clear for quite a while. New Zealand didn't have a supply of masks. We're in the Pacific Ocean, far away from anything. Um, Socially isolate, try not to catch it basically. Wash your hands, do all these hygiene things. But all of the governments and health systems were also saying the same thing. If you catch it, go home, socially isolate, don't overwhelm your health system, and go to the hospital if you have trouble breathing, which is at the end of this pathway of the disease. For me, as an old woman with a genetic metabolic disorder, in a hospital an hour away, no testing in the country yet, I knew that this scared people. It's sort of like how women feel in pregnancy. You never know what your birth's going to be like. That produces anxiety. Unfortunately, that statement is followed with, therefore, there's nothing you can really do to prepare for it. And the statement that I was hearing with governments in the medical profession is there's nothing you can do if you start to feel unwell. And that just didn't make any sense to me, right? It just didn't make any sense to me. And because I'm the director of Common Knowledge Trust, and because I've worked and traveled extensively throughout the world in third world countries where there's no access to medical care, I knew that our trust had to start to look at what we could do if we started to feel unwell. And then I got sick. Right? Nothing like try it out. So this is my progression through COVID. It was Chinese New Year's. Everybody was celebrating. I started to, which I don't normally do, even though I'm coughing now. This is not COVID related, my coughing now, okay? But I noticed I was clearing my throat, and I didn't feel well. But it was the beginning of seasonal change in New Zealand, moving into autumn. New Zealand has a lot of mold, a lot of allergies, and a lot of us felt that way. I had a stuffed nose, didn't have a fever, and I said to myself, what I know what the Chinese are doing is working very early in this. So I started to say, okay, let's assume I have this. What should I do? So I started to think about the common knowledge things that we could all do. What were the things that we could do, and what was that based on? To figure out what was it based on. So what I came up with is what do all cultures say if you cut yourself really badly? And I've asked a lot of people. They'll say, cover the wound. Yes, cover the wound. But really what it is keep it clean, isn't it? Keep the cut clean. We all know to do that. Why do we do that? We're not going to cure the cut, and we're not going to eliminate the cut. So even back in March, people were saying, particularly the medical profession, don't do anything in natural health, don't promote anything. Social media was just a full blown out thing about things that cure it and eliminate it and stuff. And people were going, it isn't proven medically. Our trust is about anything. So, however, when you use the words cure and eliminate, you are setting yourself up for people coming at you and saying, prove it medically. So when we developed the birth skills, it wasn't about creating more natural births or avoiding medical interventions. It was that 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth, and it's an activity we have to do. And humans thrive on being skilled, so let's be skilled to do this activity of birthing our baby. It didn't matter what, when, where, how, or anything. So my history is not about curing or eliminating. It's about helping ourselves. So when you cut yourself, keep it clean. You're not curing it. You're not eliminating it. What are you doing? What's the purpose of keeping it clean? We're helping our body to heal. So that was the first understanding that I had. Where does COVID enter us? It enters us through the nose, the back of the throat. And even back then, when I got it in March, they knew that it took a while, 3 to 5 days, that early symptoms where this virus was multiplying and invading our body. That's the wound. So what could we do within common knowledge to deal with that wound right away? And that was gargling with warm salt water. Every culture knows that. Have a sore throat, tooth extracted, gargle with warm salt water and spit it out. I prefer Himalayan pink salt because it's not iodized. But if you have iodine salt, that's it. All through the world, people clean out their noses. In New Zealand, they were told if you have allergies or sinuses, wash your nose out. I had a neti pot, thing like that. So you put water in one nose and it comes out the other nostril. Warm salt water. And sometimes you go, that's okay, swallow it. The viruses don't do well in your stomach, or spit it out. So how often did I think we should do it? 3 to 5 times a day or more. Whenever your nose was stuffed, whenever you felt weird, whenever you just felt freaked, because we are told if you get this, you might die. That'll freak people out. So do it often if you get it. Okay. So what else did I discover from what was being said in China? They were giving people herbal soup. Well, I didn't have herbal soup, so I went to oral rehydration because my body, my lips got dry. I'd lost my hunger. I'd lost my sense of taste and sense of smell. Well, that came up later on, didn't it? I made certain I only took in warming things because I'd studied traditional Chinese medicine and I knew that if you take in cold things, your body has to warm them up. So take in warm things, warm soups, and drink lots of warm oral rehydration. I made it up myself. How did I know how to make it up? Well, Google, but also when you see those dehydrated children all through the world, there was a big debate years ago as to whether they should hook them up for IVs or teach villagers to make oral rehydration. Well, duh, what's going to be the best, simplest thing to do? Have mothers learn how to make oral rehydration and give it to the kids. To bring every dehydrated child into the hospital and hook them up on an IV is crazy. So we have to have common knowledge. It just makes common sense. So I just made a little bit of salt, a little bit of sweet in warm water, liters or quarts, whatever. And then I knew something about desert survival just because I pick up this funny trivia. Some guy was talking about if you have 2 quarts and you're in a desert, how does your body use water best? And he said most people think you sip it, but that's not how our body uses water. So you should drink as much as you can. So what's as much as you can? Right? These are the questions. Well, you drink, glub, 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 and then your stomach just says to you, I'm full, so stop. So I made up from those first few days, I just said, I'm going to assume that I have COVID. And I marked it on the calendar because I wanted to follow the progression of this. And if I didn't have it, what was the harm of what I was doing? But if I did have it, I wanted to help myself. Now, it was only in May, so I recovered. There was an article put out by the BBC who went to countries where people were wearing masks and people weren't wearing masks because the mask debate was very early on. Should you, shouldn't you? Does it matter? Who are you protecting? Other people, yourself? What is going on? So it was unclear, and there weren't any masks in New Zealand, so we couldn't use them. And when New Zealand shut down, it wasn't a requirement to wear a mask. They just shut down everything. No takeaways. You could go to the supermarket, stand 6 feet away, and you could walk within 3 kilometers of your house, but you couldn't stop and talk. So they didn't know. In May, there was a beautiful article in the BBC about why people in some countries wear masks. And it was under the concept of every little bit helps. That fit us as common knowledge trust. That fit me as a person as well. But that was in May. But that's what I was seeing in China was act quickly, act soon, do something soon. And I knew from my experience in the modern country and being a naturopath for 50 years, this is what a large number of modern people do. "Oh, I'm not feeling really well. I'm going to wait a few days. If I still feel poorly, I'm going to go to my doctor. They're going to give me something and they're going to fix it." But the medical profession doesn't know. It's not that they're wrong. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they're stupid. It's not that they're whatever. It's just a new virus. People are trying to figure it out. So if we can help ourselves with every little bit helps, then we also help our modern healthcare system. And that's true for long haulers. So when I read on these long haul forums about how people are suffering and they're so pissed off at their medical profession, don't be pissed off at them. Begin to learn some skills. We need to help ourselves. And that's what I've been doing and doing this playlist is simple things that we can do to help ourselves. And what is it that we're looking at? Well, it wasn't entirely clear to me back then about the concept of episodes. That became clearer after I recovered from the acute phase. I treated the acute phase as though it was an episode, and it actually is broken up into 3 phases. So in that first phase, marked it on my calendar, cleaned out my nose, did my throat, gargled like mad, ate warming things. I was exhausted. I was tired. I lost a lot of weight very, very, very quickly. I was an hour from the hospital. I had no family with me. So I'm just an individual person living on my own, doing the best I can. There was some word that zinc was helpful. I know zinc. You have to take it with a meal, or it makes you sick to your stomach. Um, I've always been very low in vitamin D, so there was some scattered conversations about vitamin D. The Chinese were talking about zinc and vitamin D. They didn't feel that vitamin C was being very helpful. So I went through 3 to 4 or 5 days not feeling well. Then I felt better. And I thought, okay. But I knew at that point that the Chinese were saying there seemed to be 3 phases of this. So I had it on the calendar. I knew where I was. And sure enough, I started to feel more poorly. I started to get a fever. Cough was still there. I still had the weakness, still had a loss of sense of smell, didn't want to eat anything. I ate a lot of miso soup. For any of you who can get miso soup, it's palatable. I also used ground flaxseed, and I put the ground flaxseed in all of the oil rehydration, just a small sprinkle, so that I could keep bulking my intestines so I could still move my bowels. And every time I was dry, I drank until my stomach felt as though it had enough. Why did I do that? Because my mind, my emotions, and my body are me. And my body is fighting this virus. And it's taking a lot of work. So my mind, has to choose to help my body do this. And the body has to metabolize out the virus. The immune system has to break down the virus and has to metabolize out. Fever is good for our body, so I did nothing to try to stop the fever. I didn't have a high fever. I wasn't worried about a fever. If your body heats up, it's killing the virus. So I'm fine with having a fever. That's not a problem. When I had a fever, my skin got very sticky, very tacky. So I added another thing to the protocol. Keep washing your nose out. Keep gargling with warm salt water 3 to 5 times a day. Drink 3 to 5 liters of warm oral rehydration, warming foods only. Take a shower or a sponge bath. Get this stuff off your system because our skin is our third kidney, and our kidney and our liver, our immune system is working overtime. keep your bowels open. Keeping them open, I find using ground flaxseed that's in water where it's attracted the water and drinking it helps. And then I sprinkle it into soup. It's a great thickening agent, but it needs to be moist. You can't take it dry. You need to have lots of fluid to bulk it up. And so I kept my bowels open and I washed my skin. I took 3 to 5 showers a day. Every time I felt tacky, I did that. And so I went through that phase. 3 days, I think it was. And then I started to feel better. And I started to think, okay, the zinc, the vitamin D, doing all these things, my body's got it. And then 10 o'clock at night, I had this oppression in my chest. And it was like a panic attack. I was an instructor of Buteco and Oxygen Advantage. My breathing is very good, but I honestly felt I was having an allergic reaction, which is what the cytokine storm is, isn't it? It's the pneumonia goes into overdrive. I just got this oppression. I thought, I'm going to have a panic attack. I'm an hour from a hospital. It's in the middle of the night. I cruised around my little house, frantic to try to find something. Now, I use a lot of homeopathics, and I found the homeopathic pneumococcus pneumonia and tuberculinum. They are used homeopathically to get rid of um, historic lung issues, regardless of what they are. I took those, but I was cruising around and I found Vicks Vapor Rub. We all grew up with Vicks. Vicks is everywhere in the world. Back to common knowledge again. I put it on my chest. It did not make any difference, and I could just feel the suppression. And I was using my breathing skills, calm down, try to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, calm down, try not to have what felt like I was going to have sort of an asthma attack. That's the sympathetic nervous system. Calm down. So I took a tiny amount of Vicks, put it way up my nose, both sides, way up my nose. That looks good on video, doesn't it? Then I closed my nostril and I breathed in as deeply as I could, 5 breaths into what I imagined was every place into that lung, and then I repeated it with the other lung. No kidding, in 20 minutes that oppression stopped. And I had an insight, real or imagined, that this virus does not like strong odors. And I thought, okay, I'm better. The next night, same thing happened, not quite as severe, and I did the same thing. And I thought, okay, got better. Next night, I had the same thing, less, did the same thing. And then I started to get better. It was 20 days, 20 days that I began to get better. That took us to the middle of April. I had a plan and a ticket to leave New Zealand and come to where I'm living now in Mexico. New Zealand totally shut down, but the last week of the shutdown, they let people on temporary visas and people like myself to leave, and I came to Mexico. It was also shut down. I had to change climates and food, and I did not know why I was still unwell. It took me several months to understand that I was having COVID long haul symptoms. At that point, the research in April and May was that there were these long haul symptoms, that COVID was not just a respiratory disorder, that it was actually a blood vessel disorder, which I was very aware of because I had been diagnosed 3 years before with a genetic metabolic disorder because I had had blocked arteries and had a bypass surgery without having had a heart attack. And the surgeon told me I probably had a genetic issue. And then eventually I got tested for methylation, and I have a genetic methylation problem, which means I don't metabolize B vitamins, which means my body has a lot of homocysteine, and the homocysteine scars the endothelial cells and the blood vessels, and the plaque attaches there. So when this became a blood vessel disease, I had some information about this and some experience about this. And so I started to look at the long haul symptoms and what people were experiencing. At that time as well, the medical profession was realizing that you couldn't keep people lying on their backs because that was compressing their lungs. And they began to put out breathing exercises for people. And since I was already trained in breathing, I started to look as well on YouTube for breathing exercises not related to COVID. There was a beautiful one, Shaolin exercise, where you just expand your lungs and you do it in different ways and breathing in and doing things like that. And so I realized that we had to keep using our lungs. And if this was a blood vessel disease, then it was stimulating our sympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight, and fight. And I rabbit on about this in all of the posts. Our parasympathetic nervous system is calm. Our sympathetic nervous system closes down our cardiovascular system. The parasympathetic nervous system dilates it, which then brings us to things like nitric oxide and carbon dioxide tolerance and nose-nose breathing and using your diaphragm. All of these things are common knowledge, but we don't know. And why don't we know? First of all, it's not our fault that we don't know. We don't know because for most of us living in modern cultures, sadly, for a very long period of time, we've been told that healthcare, it should be modern healthcare, and that natural remedies are called alternative. That means that puts people in the dichotomy of choice, either this or that. Same way with a natural birth. Choose a natural birth. Well, you can't choose a natural birth because there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. Babies don't come to plan. So I, as a person, all of my life's work came into focus with COVID. Pregnant women couldn't have their husbands with them in the hospital when they were in labor, or a doula. So our trust did a COVID quick birth course so that people could become skilled. And then we put out as a trust a protocol about what you do when you first get sick, which is the gargle with warm salt water, clean out your nose, drink, shower, clean, breathing exercises. I couldn't put in the homeopathics. I could put in the Vicks, that's there, because people don't know about homeopathics or don't have access or believe that they don't work. Doesn't matter. So anything that you can use works. There are plenty of respiratory teas, both Chinese and modern, Western medicine, Western herbalism, essential oils. Every little bit helps if we can help ourselves. So then it became obvious to me that I had episodes. The episodes were fatigue. The episodes were, for me, left side headache. The episode, I didn't have breathing problems. I didn't have oppression of the chest. I had a lot of tingling. I still have a spot on my back that tingles. I had itching, itching all over. Huge loss of hair. And everything I had to look and see are the things that I could do to help myself. And what were the scary things? And what were just episodes that I had to try to figure out what to do with? Then it became really obvious that a contraction in labor is an episode, right? So what you're trying to do is reduce not the intensity, but your response to the intensity. Can't reduce how long they last, but I could try to reduce that with itching and put space in between before I itched again, or before I was exhausted again, or before any of the other symptoms that I had again came up. And they came up as episodes. They weren't all connected. They were different. So my fatigue wasn't connected to my itching. My hair falling out wasn't either. I had a lot of tingling in my limbs. I I went through periods where I still felt very dry, and so I stayed doing that protocol. I continue to do that protocol, and still today, not all the time, because the episodes have lessened over time. But right now, my nose is a bit stuffed. After I talk, I'm going to go and I'll clean up my nose. If I get a sore throat, I immediately gargled. If my lips felt dry, I made up oral rehydration. So when the COVID long haul groups came into being, I sort of browsed them and found that if you mentioned anything about natural health, the reaction often of the administrators was, it isn't proven medically. We have three choices. Wait till the medical profession understands this. I grew up in polio. It took 40 years before there was a vaccine. Trust me, that doesn't always work. Okay? Or we can just do nothing. And I hear a lot of people just feel that way. Or we can do for ourselves. And that goes back to the wearing of the masks. Every little bit helps. Everything we can do for ourselves. And it goes back to our trust. You have the right to do for yourself. If you don't know how to be skilled, you have Google now. If you're listening to me, you have Google now. I'm not a great researcher. I pick and choose what I like and what I don't like, but I do things, and I do things around episodes. If I have an intense episode, I'm looking for things that reduce the intensity. If that episode lasts for a long period of time, I'm looking for things that reduce the length of time. And I'm looking for things that expand the time between the episodes. What I hear people say now is, I felt better, I felt sick, I'm bummed. A lot of people on these forums are, are angry with their body. So I'm going to leave you this because I have talked enough and I'm not certain I've said everything. Our mind, our emotions, and our body are us. We have to love us. We have to take care of us. We do. Too many times when I am dealing with pregnant women and they've had a baby, pregnancy is all about them. They have a baby and they get exhausted. This is what I've learned living in traditional communities. If you're going to care for someone else, you have to care for yourself first. I am a COVID long hauler. Raise my hand. Who am I going to care for? Me. If you're using medical stuff, great, because that falls under common knowledge. If you're using traditional stuff, great, that falls under common knowledge. Natural stuff, great, that falls under common knowledge. The more you can do for yourself and the more you feel these things are helping, pass that on to your doctor. Might they go, eh? Of course they might. On the other hand, 50 years ago, doctors did not think that diabetes, heart problems, obesity had anything to do with stress, diet, or exercise. They've changed. Now is a time where we begin to bring these things together by things that we do. It's important on the long haul that we explain to people what we're doing. If a person says, well, I tried that. So I saw an article the other day. Somebody posted of a guy who had difficulty and he went out and exercised, and then he said, I felt better. And somebody went, well, don't shame us. He was an article. I wasn't trying to shame you. Well, that didn't work for me. No, it might not. Okay, that's okay. If it worked for them, that's fine. If something you do doesn't quite work, you have choices. Either go, it doesn't work, or refine it if you believe it does work. The importance of dealing with long haul episodes is consciousness and loving ourselves and making decisions, doing some research, applying skills consciously, because this is our body trying to throw off this virus and the metabolic waste products, and the body is trying to then heal its immune system. And if you are struggling with COVID long haul symptoms, you've got time. And time is where you can have this huge personal transformation into self-awareness and self-healing. Does it take work? Yes, it does. Is there a benefit to this? Yes, little by little, we get better. So, for instance, I go onto YouTube for all of us. I'm very physically active. I'm 76. I was too tired to do dick. Okay. But I went onto YouTube and found some very simple stretching exercises that I could do sitting or standing. I did my breathing. As I said, there's just beautiful breathing stuff on the YouTube. Brain waves, for brain waves to calm yourself. It's all over the place. Relaxing music, it's all over the place, right? If it works for you, share it. If somebody comes back and says, well, it didn't work for me, you know what your response should be? Did you find something that did work for you? And would you please share that? We have these things called social media. Right? We should be using the social media long haul groups, in my opinion, as a way to talk about the common knowledge of self help coupled with the healthcare that's coming from modern healthcare or our traditional healthcare or our natural healthcare. We need to help ourselves and we need to help each other. So that's my COVID story. I'm going to continue to post, honestly, until I run out of words, because what else should I be doing right now? So thank you for listening. And our playlist is on our Birthing Better Childbirth Preparation YouTube channel. What can I say? And now I post these in several long haul COVID long haul groups. Thanks for sharing it. And if you have any comments, please let me know. And yes, I do work online with people because as a person, I help other people. And that's also the work I do. So you're always welcome to reach out to me. So thank you very much. Bye bye.